I feel good about that. Nice. Okay, shot one done. Wow, we're just flying through.
Today is a very different day, and we're doing something that is very unique and new for me. Over the last several months, I have been writing a book all about freeze drying. The manuscript for that is now turned in. It's in the publisher's hands, but they need photographs. So the publisher just sent out a professional photographer to take all the photographs we need for the book. This is something that's kind of new. It's very different, so come check it out.
First shot is the preparing step, and that's getting things into the correct shape. I've been preserving a whole lot of food for our family for over about 2 decades at this point. And preserving food's always been really important to me, making sure that we have good quality food to last us all the way through the year, and to make sure we have a good store of food, backup food on the shelf. Pretty much creating like that grocery store in my pantry. That's always been really important to me. I've done a lot of preserving, and I remember some years ago when I first heard about freeze drying, I, at that point, was putting up probably 1,200 to 1,500 jars of food every single year, either canned or dehydrated or fermented. And when I heard about freeze drying, my first thought was, oh, it's just another gimmick. You know, we haven't needed a machine like this for thousands of years that we've been preserving. Why do we need one now? It's just an expensive gimmick, really. Well, that was before I had ever tried freeze drying. So Harvest Right at some point called us and asked if we'd be willing to try out a freeze dryer. At that point, I was totally skeptical, but you know, I thought, okay, this is my chance to let everybody know that they really don't need a fancy machine in order to preserve food. So I said yes to it, really thinking that I knew the way that this was going to turn out. Well, you know, sometimes you don't get your own story right in your head when you're looking ahead too far. So I started using the freeze dryer, and I was really impressed, actually, right off the bat. It was the easiest thing I'd ever done. And it was really fast as far as my work time. It was like put the food in the machine and push a few buttons and it's good to go. What was even more exciting to me was the state of the food when it came out of the freeze dryer.
Whenever you're ready. Great.
What is the purpose of this, Carolyn?
Testing to see if the food is entirely dry. Because it's one of the most important parts of freeze drying is making sure that your food is entirely dry before you go to store it. Otherwise it'll mold or go bad in storage. And so you need to know how to test it. So this one's a little different because it's a liquid, so it's going to powder. Okay. But it's going to come off in a big chunk first, and then we'll have to powder it. So I think I really want to show the powdery, like when it's dry, all the way it will powder. Mm-hmm. So I need to like take a chunk off or even break open in the middle and then be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm almost
even into my
there
own
you go,
hand.
into your hand.
Yeah.
I was thinking like either that or cutting board. Hand's perfect.
Okay. You see it just kind of crumbles like that.
Okay.
It's important to test it from the middle.
Okay.
So that's why I'm trying to like get in and get here. And then, you know, that might be, oh, they're falling apart. Like even to show it like that. It was so versatile. I think right at the beginning, I ended up freeze drying onions and bell peppers together in a mix. We were using those all the time in the kitchen. They were just so practical and so easy to grab and so easy to use that we were just really using them and enjoying them. The flavors were bright and they rehydrated really well. And so I thought, well, okay, that went better than I thought it was gonna go, but I kind of thought that maybe I had just lucked out and picked the one thing that was actually really practical to freeze dry. So I started trying other things. I tried some milk from our cow, which if you guys know anything about preserving, you'll know that milk is one of those things that is almost impossible to preserve in any other method. You can't safely can it. When you ferment it, it turns into a different product like yogurt or something. It's not milk anymore. You can't really dehydrate it at home. And so when the milk turned out great, I started to really get excited about the possibilities of freeze drying. Now I've used our freeze dryers for several years. I went ahead after that first machine right here that Harvest Right sent us. I purchased another machine, and then I went ahead and purchased a third machine because I love them so much and we're using them all the time. I really went from this moment of like, oh, it's not worth anything, to using it and realizing this could change my preserving year. It could change the amount of time that I spend over a hot pot in the kitchen. And it has. It has saved me now hundreds of hours having these things. Plus our food is now holding in better nutrients and the flavor is amazing. I really, really am loving it. Actually, you know what could be really fun?
What's that?
What if we take a fresh one next to a freeze-dried one, and then I take two and I smush them both?
Cool.
Because you'll see one's like totally wet and the other's totally
Dry.
powdered pretty much.
Woo! Cool.
That one didn't quite get, oh, there we go, like
You want it
smushy, like a little more powdery look to it.
Yeah.
I got excited about the potential of using it, but the problem that's out there is that finding good information on freeze drying, it's just really hard to find. It's kind of a newer thing when it comes to home use. It was challenging to get really good information. Where the most of the information was on these free Facebook groups about freeze drying. I don't know what it is about people who freeze dry and use Facebook, but they're not very nice. These groups are very unkind, they're very rude, and it's very hard to sort through and find the information that you need. And they don't like it if you ask questions in these groups. If you've been in one of these, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's kind of a weird phenomena. It became very unpleasant to try to find the information. So think like a hamburger patty. You don't want to break it to tell if it's done because you want it to all be in one piece. A way of telling is by weighing your food, then putting it back in the freeze dryer for a couple hours and pulling it back out and seeing if there's any difference, because if there's a difference, it means that it got rid of more moisture. Being able to weigh it can be really important, and especially when people are beginners and they don't feel real confident about knowing, it's a really helpful method. And so I set out to just pretty much create a resource for myself for being able to freeze dry and have all the information that I needed at my fingertips. Then the publishers started calling. And I actually had two different publishers come to me at pretty much the exact same time and ask me to write a book about freeze drying, which was a complete surprise to me. I did not expect, when I said yes skeptically to this first freeze dryer, I absolutely did not think that my journey was going to include writing a book about how to freeze dry your garden produce. Yet here I was with offers on the table to write a book to be able to help tons of other households do the exact same thing we were doing and save time, money, and get better nutrient density out of their preserved food. And so I said yes. And so here I am, ready to write a book.
The oranges don't need to be pre-treated, right?
So when it comes to pre-treating, you don't need to pre-treat them because of the acidity. That's not an issue when it comes to freeze drying. But these little sections all have the membrane on them, and the membrane turns incredibly bitter when you're freeze drying it. It's like you can almost not eat it, it's so bitter. So obviously nobody has time to sit around and try and remove the membrane from each and every little piece of orange. But there's something called pectic enzyme. And what it is, it's an enzyme that breaks down pectin, right? So if you put it on your sections of mandarin or on oranges or lemons or grapefruits or anything like that, it will actually eat away that membrane after about 24 hours. And then you can just rinse it off and you can freeze dry it. And so it's something that's not bad for you at all. It's not a bad chemical, but it helps you be much more efficient in actually processing something like this and getting it freeze dried. And then when that membrane's gone and you freeze dry it, these taste incredible. They taste really good.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I was not prepared for what comes along with writing a book. I've never written a full book before. I've written some ebooks, some smaller books, and I've co-written a book with somebody, but I've never written a book all by myself. It involved hundreds and hundreds of loads of freeze-dried food, testing things, making sure I was getting the ratios right for helping people rehydrate their food easily. Thankfully, I had a good friend of mine who also freeze dries, able to help me. So she actually ran all of the test batches, and it was like a science lab. We were keeping numbers, we were keeping times, there were timers on everything, there were scales going. It was really interesting, but we were pulling together all the information that I knew I wish I had in my own kitchen, and she wished she had in her kitchen, to make freeze drying really, really straightforward and easy. Just because you get the information doesn't mean that it puts itself in book form. So it took many, many hours of sitting down and actually putting that into written form. And then came the edits. And, luckily working with a publisher, they have a lot of editors. They have subject matter editors. They have, the technical editors for all the grammar stuff, for making sure things are clear. So I was really thankful for that. But when I got my manuscript back, it looked like, a horror scene from elementary school where everything's like red checked off and marked and crossed out and circled. And that's what it felt like, having to work through the manuscript time and time again. And you hear this about writing a book, but I'd never really had the experience. So that was really new for me. And then came the photo shoots.
Before I did a photo shoot, before this, I've had no experience with this kind of photo shoot. I am floored at the amount of prep work that goes into something like this. The fact that people do this all the time is just amazing to me. But you're hoping to maybe get through 20, 25 different foods in a day that you're taking pictures of. And when you're doing that, it's not just the food. You have to have the food prepared. And of course, when we're talking freeze-dried, we have to have the raw version of the food, the freeze-dried version of the food, and then maybe the food used in a dish after it's been freeze-dried. So each one of those things requires different preps, and that's all just one food item. And then there's just getting it set up so it looks pretty and getting all the prep and making sure I'm presentable and I don't have food all over me after doing all the prep work and all of those different pieces. I have a lot of respect for people who do this kind of work all the time now after I've done it. But we have a series of two-day photo shoots for the book, and it's pretty intensive, and it is definitely a lot more than 4 days worth of work. It's like weeks of work to do that much on photo shoots. So it's kind of interesting. I don't know that it's something I'd want to do all the time, but it's fun to try something new.
I feel like just the way that freeze drying preserves the flavor, the texture, it makes foods crispier, like cherry tomatoes and apples. Grapes are unbelievable freeze dried. I didn't know that I was a freeze dry snack person, but I am. It's like the most delicious tomato you've ever had. It's like fresh from the garden. It's just so different than like a dehydrated tomato, even a fresh tomato. It feels brighter. I'd pop them on everything. Salads, pastas. Yeah, they're really good.
The manuscript and the photography come together to make this a completed total book that is ready for pre-order. So check it out. I'll have a link in the description for you below, and you can pre-order your copy of Freeze Drying the Harvest.